Rain slid down the towering windows in long silver streams, blurring the lights of Coruscant into rivers of gold and blue. Beyond the transparastile, air speeders drifted through the endless city like glowing insects beneath a storm. Inside, the corridor was quiet. The polished stone floor reflected rows of soft lamps, and somewhere far away a door opened and closed with a muted hiss. 5 immense spires rose above you into the darkness, their upper levels disappearing into clouds that wrapped around the skyline of the Galactic Republic's capital. At first glance, it seemed like the safest place in the galaxy. A sanctuary untouched by fear, untouched by war. Yet beneath those elegant towers lay one of the strangest secrets in all of Star Wars history. This is the hidden truth about the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a place that stood at the center of galactic events for thousands of years and witnessed the rise and fall of entire eras. Settle in, relax, and let the noise of the day drift away as we walk slowly through its halls together. If you've traveled with these stories before, mention which night of the journey you've reached. If you're new here, simply call this night one. The deeper you look at the temple, the stranger it becomes. The headquarters of the Jedi Order was not merely a school, a monastery, or a government institution. It was built on top of something that should have terrified the very people who lived there. Why would the Jedi construct their holiest sanctuary over a place steeped in the dark side of the Force? The question sounds almost impossible when you first hear it. The Jedi devoted their lives to balance, self-discipline, compassion, and resistance to the temptations of the dark side. For centuries, they searched the galaxy for dangerous Sith artifacts, hunted dark side cults, and protected worlds from those who sought power through fear and domination. Yet canon sources tell us that beneath the temple rested an ancient Sith shrine dating back to a time long before the Republic became the dominant government of the galaxy. By the era of the Skywalker saga, very few people knew the shrine existed. Most citizens of Coruscant walked beneath the temple's shadows every day without suspecting that buried under layers of stone, steel, and history was a remnant of the Jedi Order's oldest enemy. The mystery is not whether the shrine existed. The mystery is why the Jedi chose that exact location. To understand the answer, you have to travel far back into galactic history, into an age that remains only partially illuminated by canon. Long before the Clone Wars, long before the Republic's Senate filled its vast chambers, Coruscant was already one of the most important worlds in known space. The planet became the capital of the Galactic Republic thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin. Countless governments rose and fell there. Entire cultures disappeared beneath newer layers of construction, every century built upon the bones of the previous one. By the time of the High Republic era, much of the ancient surface had vanished beneath mountains of architecture stretching thousands of levels downward. Coruscant was less a city than a civilization stacked endlessly upon itself. Somewhere within those forgotten ages, dark side worshippers established a powerful nexus. Canon never gives us a complete account of who built the original shrine or exactly when it was founded. What we do know comes from references in works such as the novel Tarkin and later comic stories connected to Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine. The shrine generated a concentration of dark side energy that lingered across centuries. It was not simply a temple in the ordinary sense. It was a place where the Force itself felt different. The dark side seemed to gather there naturally, as if invisible currents were flowing toward a single point beneath the city. Even after the builders vanished, the presence remained. Many fans assumed the Jedi were unaware of what lay beneath them. Canon suggests the opposite. A popular interpretation among lore historians is that the Jedi knew exactly what existed below and deliberately chose to build over it. Their reasoning appears surprisingly practical. Rather than destroy the shrine, something that may not have been possible, they buried it beneath the heart of the Order. Thousands of Jedi meditating, studying, and living above the Nexus would effectively suppress its influence. Instead of running from darkness, they would contain it. In this reading, the temple itself became a seal placed over an ancient wound in the Force. Whether that decision was wise remains one of the great unanswered questions of Star Wars lore. During the final decades of the Republic, the Jedi Order slowly drifted into a crisis it could not recognize. The Sith returned in secret. Darth Sidious infiltrated the Republic itself. The Jedi sensed that something was wrong, yet repeatedly complained that their vision through the Force had become clouded. In Attack of the Clones, Yoda openly discusses this growing blindness with Mace Windu. The dark side, he explains, surrounds everything. Their ability to see clearly is diminishing. The timing is difficult to ignore. Above an ancient dark side nexus, the Jedi found themselves unable to perceive the greatest Sith threat in 1,000 years. Of course, correlation is not proof. Canon never states that the buried shrine caused the Jedi's blindness. Darth Sidious was enormously powerful, and the Clone Wars generated fear and suffering across thousands of worlds. Those factors alone could have distorted the Force, yet the question continues to linger. If the Jedi spent centuries sitting atop a dark side nexus, did the darkness slowly influence events around them in ways they never understood? Did the shrine merely exist beneath the temple, or was it quietly shaping the fate of the Order? Lucasfilm has left the mystery open, which makes it all the more fascinating. As the centuries passed, the temple became far more than a protective structure. It grew into the center of Jedi civilization itself. By the time of the High Republic, roughly 200 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Order had reached one of the most stable periods in its history. Jedi served across the galaxy as explorers, diplomats, scholars, and protectors. The Republic expanded into frontier regions through initiatives such as the Starlight Beacon Project. Masters traveled from world to world, resolving disputes and responding to crises. Yet no matter how far they journeyed, Coruscant remained home. The temple stood at the center of that identity. The structure itself was immense. From a distance, its 5 great towers appeared almost organic, like stone peaks growing naturally from the city below. In reality, they contained a vast network of chambers, training facilities, archives, meditation rooms, hangars, residences, gardens, and meeting halls. Thousands of Jedi passed through its corridors over the generations. Some arrived as young children sensitive to the Force. Others returned after years spent serving in distant sectors of the galaxy. To them, the temple was not simply a workplace. It was where friendships began, where lessons were learned, and where the traditions of the Order were preserved. Imagine approaching Coruscant as a young initiate for the first time. Your transport descends through layers of cloud into a city that stretches beyond the horizon in every direction. Towers rise higher than mountains. Rivers of traffic weave through the sky. Then among the countless structures, you see the temple. Even surrounded by the greatest metropolis in the galaxy, it dominates the landscape. Its architecture feels ancient beside the sleek buildings around it. It seems to belong to another age. For many young Force sensitives, that first glimpse marked the beginning of a life that would never resemble that of ordinary citizens again. And yet beneath the confidence, wisdom, and order projected by those soaring towers, a contradiction remained buried in silence. The Jedi Temple represented the light side of the Force more visibly than any building in the Republic. Senators looked toward it as a symbol of stability. Citizens saw it as a monument to peace. Pilots navigating above Coruscant used it as a landmark visible from enormous distances. But deep underneath its foundations, sealed away from public knowledge, rested the lingering shadow of an ancient enemy. The closer you look at the temple, the harder it becomes to separate the history of the Jedi from the history of the darkness they spent millennia fighting. And as rain continued to slide down the temple windows, and the lights of Coruscant shimmered beyond the glass, another question slowly emerged from the silence. If the Jedi chose this place because they believed they could contain darkness, what else inside those towers were they trying to contain? Why did the Jedi Temple feel less like a monastery and more like the capital of a civilization? The answer begins with scale. When most people in the galaxy imagined the Jedi Order, they pictured individual heroes, a lone knight negotiating peace on Naboo, a master tracking pirates in the Outer Rim, or a small team dispatched to investigate disturbances on distant worlds. Yet the temple on Coruscant reveals a different reality. By the final centuries of the Republic, the Jedi were not merely wandering guardians. They were an institution with administrative systems, educational programs, security forces, diplomatic responsibilities, and a leadership structure that reached across thousands of star systems. Every one of those functions converged inside a single complex rising above the Federal District of Coruscant. From the air, the temple occupied one of the most prestigious locations on the planet. Nearby stood the Galactic Senate, where representatives debated laws affecting millions of worlds. Government ministries operated throughout the surrounding district. Diplomats, trade officials, military officers, and planetary delegations moved constantly through the area. The Jedi had not been pushed to the margins of galactic society. They lived at its very center. If a visitor stood atop one of the temple's highest balconies during the final years before the Clone Wars, they could look across Coruscant and see the machinery of the Republic operating in every direction. This proximity created a relationship that would shape the fate of both institutions. Officially, the Jedi Order remained independent. The Council did not answer directly to the Senate. Jedi were not elected officials. They possessed no voting seats in government. Yet the partnership between Republic and Order had become so deep after millennia that separating them was nearly impossible. When crises emerged, senators requested Jedi intervention. When negotiations failed, Jedi mediators were dispatched. When conflicts threatened stability, the Council became involved. Over time, the temple evolved into something that occupied a strange position between religious sanctuary, university, intelligence agency, and diplomatic headquarters. Why were so many Jedi willing to leave distant worlds and return repeatedly to Coruscant? Part of the answer was tradition. Another part was knowledge. The temple held resources unavailable anywhere else in the galaxy. Generations of Jedi had contributed discoveries, research, and records to its archives. Ancient holocrons preserved teachings from masters long dead, mission reports accumulated across centuries, star charts documented regions explored by Republic scouts, historical records stretched back thousands of years. For a Jedi seeking answers, the temple often represented the greatest concentration of information in existence. No section of the complex embodied this better than the Jedi archives. Located deep within the temple, the archives became legendary, even among non-Jedi scholars. Vast chambers contained rows of illuminated data repositories extending farther than many visitors expected possible. Information was organized with extraordinary precision. The system reflected the Jedi belief that knowledge itself could be a path toward wisdom. While soldiers collected weapons and governments collected taxes, the Order collected understanding. Entire lifetimes were devoted to preserving it. One of the most important figures in this effort was Jocasta Nu, the chief librarian during the final years of the Republic. Calm, disciplined, and deeply confident in the integrity of the archives, she became one of their most recognizable guardians. Audiences first met her in Attack of the Clones during Obi-Wan Kenobi's investigation into the mystery of Kamino. The exchange has become famous among Star Wars fans. Searching for information about a missing world, Obi-Wan found nothing. Jocasta Nu responded with complete certainty. If a planet was not in the archives, she explained, it did not exist. Yet that statement concealed a problem that cut directly to the heart of the temple's reputation. How could the greatest collection of knowledge in the galaxy fail to notice that an entire star system had been erased? The answer led Obi-Wan into one of the earliest clues of the Sith conspiracy. Kamino had existed all along. The ocean world remained exactly where it had always been. Its cities still floated above endless seas. Its cloners continued producing. The army secretly commissioned for the Republic. The problem was not reality. The problem was the records. Someone had deliberately removed Kamino from the Jedi archives. The deletion was so thorough that even experienced researchers failed to recognize what had happened. Later canon material connected the act to Count Dooku during the period after his departure from the Jedi Order and before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. Acting under the influence of Darth Sidious, Dooku manipulated information stored within the temple itself. The implications are astonishing. A future Sith Lord infiltrated the greatest repository of Jedi knowledge and altered it without triggering immediate discovery. The archives remained magnificent, but the Kamino incident exposed a vulnerability. Knowledge could be protected. It could also be manipulated. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when viewed from the perspective of the temple's broader history. The Jedi often treated the archives almost as an extension of memory itself. Information stored there acquired enormous authority. Younglings learned from it, masters consulted it, researchers trusted it. Yet the Kamino deletion demonstrated that records, no matter how carefully maintained, remain dependent upon those who control them. A single act of sabotage created a blind spot that helped conceal the origins of the clone army destined to transform the Republic forever. For all their sophistication, the archives were not magical. They were managed by living beings with assumptions, habits, and limitations. The Jedi believed strongly in reasoned inquiry. They studied evidence, they cataloged data, they preserved history. Yet the Order occasionally displayed a subtle confidence that information already possessed must be sufficient. The Camino mystery shattered that confidence. A child standing in those archive halls might have assumed every answer could be found somewhere among the records. Obi-Wan's investigation proved otherwise. The archives also housed treasures far older than ordinary documents. Among the most important were Jedi holocrons, intricate devices capable of storing teachings, experiences, and knowledge through advanced technology guided by the Force. To activate many holocrons required Force sensitivity. They were not simply books in electronic form. They functioned almost like conversations across generations. A Jedi could study lessons recorded centuries earlier and interact with preserved wisdom in ways impossible through conventional texts. The temple therefore served as a bridge between living Jedi and countless predecessors, stretching back through history. Some holocrons focused on philosophy. Others preserved techniques of lightsaber combat. Still others recorded knowledge of distant worlds, Force traditions, or ancient events. Protecting these artifacts became one of the temple's most sacred responsibilities. Their value extended beyond scholarship. They represented continuity. Every generation inherited them, added to them, and passed them onward. In a galaxy constantly changing through war, exploration, and political upheaval, the holocrons helped maintain a sense of identity. Yet even here, a contradiction emerged. The temple preserved knowledge obsessively, but knowledge itself often carried danger. Certain records documented Sith history. Some described dark side cults. Others contained information that could be misused by ambitious individuals. The Jedi understood that ignorance was risky. They also understood that unrestricted access could be worse. As a result, parts of the temple remained closed to ordinary members of the Order. Beyond the public chambers and educational halls existed restricted areas known only to selected Jedi. And that raises another question. If the archives contained the greatest collection of wisdom in the galaxy, what exactly was important enough to hide from the Jedi themselves? As night settled over Coruscant and the temple's lights glowed against the storm beyond its windows, the answer waited deeper within the complex, behind sealed doors and guarded vaults, where knowledge was no longer merely enlightening. It was dangerous. Why did the Jedi spend so much effort protecting dangerous knowledge instead of destroying it? At first, the idea feels counterintuitive. The Jedi Order existed to oppose the dark side, so one might expect them to eliminate every Sith artifact they encountered. Yet throughout canon, the Jedi repeatedly chose preservation over destruction. Ancient relics, forbidden texts, corrupted objects, and dangerous holocrons were often secured rather than erased. The reasoning reflected a philosophy older than the Republic itself. A threat that is forgotten can return unexpectedly. A threat that is understood can be recognized when it appears again. Deep within the temple, that principle shaped some of its most secret chambers. The public areas of the temple projected openness and serenity. Younglings trained there, visiting officials attended meetings. Jedi moved freely between classrooms, meditation spaces, and archive halls. But beyond those familiar corridors existed restricted vaults, accessible only to carefully selected individuals. Some held valuable artifacts. Others contained objects considered so dangerous that ordinary Jedi were forbidden from approaching them. The temple functioned as a center of learning, but it was also a fortress guarding knowledge that could not safely be released. One of the most fascinating examples appears in the Clone Wars through the story of Jedi holocrons. These devices were far more than simple storage containers. Certain holocrons contained information about Force-sensitive children throughout the galaxy. Others preserved advanced teachings intended only for experienced Jedi. Because of their significance, holocrons were kept under extraordinary security. When Cad Bane infiltrated the temple during the Clone Wars and stole a holocron containing sensitive records, the incident triggered immediate alarm across the Order. The theft demonstrated that knowledge itself could be as strategically important as fleets or armies. The mission exposed another reality about the temple. Even during the Republic's final years, its defenses were not invulnerable. Cad Bane was among the most skilled bounty hunters in the galaxy, but he succeeded only because Darth Sidious carefully orchestrated events behind the scenes. The Sith understood something the Jedi sometimes underestimated. Information could become a weapon. Knowing the identities of Force-sensitive children across the galaxy created opportunities for manipulation, recruitment, or elimination. The temple protected records because those records possessed immense power. Yet the Jedi were not merely guarding information about themselves. They also preserved evidence of their enemies. Why keep Sith artifacts inside the very building dedicated to opposing the Sith? The question becomes even stranger when you remember what the Jedi knew about Sith history. For 1,000 years before the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY, the Sith were believed extinct. The Order taught the history of ancient Sith lords. They studied past wars. They examined the methods through which darkness spread. The goal was educational, but the material remained hazardous. Some artifacts were capable of influencing those who interacted with them. Others served as gateways to knowledge the Jedi considered deeply corrupting. Simply locking them away was never a perfect solution. Canon repeatedly shows that dark side objects possess unusual persistence. Across series such as Rebels, comics involving Darth Vader, and later stories surrounding Exegol, relics continue affecting events long after their creators die. The Jedi understood this pattern. Destroying an artifact was not always straightforward. Some items resisted destruction. Others carried historical significance that researchers believed should be preserved. As a result, secure storage became the preferred solution. The temple effectively became the galaxy's most carefully guarded museum of dangerous history. The irony is difficult to miss. The Order built its headquarters above an ancient Sith shrine and then filled portions of that headquarters with captured remnants of Sith influence. The Jedi did not see this as hypocrisy. They saw it as vigilance. Darkness could not be fought effectively if its nature remained unknown. Study, observation, and containment formed part of their strategy. Nevertheless, from a modern perspective, The arrangement feels unsettling. The temple increasingly resembles a place balancing between two opposing forces rather than a sanctuary occupied entirely by one side. If some chambers protected dangerous objects, who protected the chambers themselves? The answer leads to one of the most mysterious groups within the entire Jedi Order, the Temple Guards. Unlike famous Jedi Masters, Temple Guards rarely appeared in public life. They did not command armies during the Clone Wars. They did not negotiate treaties before the Senate. They did not become celebrated heroes throughout the Republic. Yet within the temple, their authority was extraordinary. Clad in distinctive robes and expressionless masks, they moved through the complex with a presence that felt almost ceremonial. Their yellow, double-bladed lightsabers immediately distinguished them from ordinary Jedi. The masks are particularly intriguing. Most Jedi are remembered as individuals. Their personalities matter. Their identities remain visible. Temple Guards deliberately surrendered that visibility. When wearing the uniform of their office, they became representatives of the institution rather than themselves. The symbolism was powerful. Personal ambition, personal recognition, and personal status disappeared behind the mask. What remained was duty. To many observers, the guards appeared less like ordinary Jedi and more like living extensions of the temple itself. The Clone Wars offers one of the clearest looks at their role during the crisis involving Ahsoka Tano. After a bombing at the temple, an investigation unfolded that eventually led to Ahsoka's arrest and trial. Throughout the ordeal, Temple Guards participated in security operations and enforcement. They acted according to procedure rather than personal loyalty. This neutrality reinforced their purpose. They existed to protect the Order and its laws, not individual friendships. For Ahsoka, the experience became one of the most painful moments of her life. For the guards, it represented the execution of responsibility. There is another fascinating dimension to their existence. Temple Guards often seem detached from the political struggles consuming the Republic. While the Jedi Council debated military strategy and Chancellor Palpatine accumulated power, the Guards remained focused on preservation and security. They watched over sacred spaces. They monitored restricted areas. They maintained continuity while the galaxy changed around them. In some respects, they embodied an older vision of what the Jedi were supposed to be. Yet even the guards could not stop the deeper problems growing within the Order. Security measures protected vaults, restricted access protected artifacts, archives preserved knowledge. None of those systems addressed the more subtle danger emerging during the Republic's final years. The Jedi were becoming increasingly entangled with politics, warfare, and government administration. The threat was not entering through a locked door. It was already sitting inside the highest levels of power. And that brings us to another mystery hidden within the temple. Above the archives, above the training halls, above the guarded vaults and sealed chambers, there was a room where a handful of Jedi Masters met to guide the future of the entire Order. From that chamber they could see the Senate towers stretching across Coruscant's horizon. The view was magnificent. The consequences would be catastrophic. Did the Jedi Council's view over Coruscant slowly change the way the Jedi saw themselves? The Council Chamber sat near the summit of the temple's highest tower, one of the most recognizable rooms in Star Wars. tall windows overlooked the endless cityscape of Coruscant. During daylight, sunlight poured through the transparisteel and illuminated the circular arrangement of seats occupied by the Order's senior leaders. During storms, flashes of distant lightning reflected across polished floors while air traffic drifted far below. It was a room designed for contemplation, yet it was also a room where decisions affecting entire sectors of the galaxy were made. Over centuries, that combination of wisdom and authority transformed the chamber into one of the most influential locations in the Republic. The membership of the High Council changed across generations, but by the final years before the Clone Wars, certain figures had become legendary. Yoda served as Grand Master and possessed centuries of experience. Mace Windu was respected for his discipline, judgment, and formidable mastery of the Force. Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, Shaak-Ti, Saesee-Tiin, and others contributed perspectives shaped by vastly different backgrounds and worlds. Together, they represented the highest leadership of the Order. Their responsibilities extended far beyond training students. They evaluated threats, assigned missions, interpreted Jedi doctrine, and maintained the relationship between the Order and the Republic. The chamber itself reflected an ideal the Jedi valued deeply. No throne occupied its center. No single seat dominated the room. Members sat in a circle symbolizing consultation rather than absolute rule. Even Yoda, despite his immense authority, participated as part of the collective body. The arrangement reinforced the belief that wisdom emerged through discussion and balance. Yet symbols do not always guarantee outcomes. As the Republic entered its final decades, the Council found itself confronting problems unlike any faced by previous generations. Why did the Jedi become so deeply involved in politics when their philosophy emphasized detachment? The answer lies partly in history. For thousands of years, the Jedi and Republic had grown together. The Republic depended upon Jedi mediators to resolve disputes. The Jedi depended upon the Republic to maintain galactic stability. Neither institution originally viewed this relationship as dangerous. On the contrary, it often produced remarkable successes. Trade conflicts were resolved peacefully. Planetary disputes ended through negotiation rather than war. Countless crises were prevented before violence erupted. Cooperation appeared natural because it had existed for so long. The difficulty emerged when circumstances changed. By the time of the Phantom Menace in 32 BBY, corruption and bureaucracy had become increasingly visible within portions of the Senate. The Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo exposed weaknesses in the Republic's ability to respond decisively. Chancellor Valorum struggled to act. Political factions delayed solutions. Into that environment stepped Jedi such as Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, who were dispatched as negotiators. Their mission demonstrated how closely intertwined the Jedi and Republic had become. When government mechanisms faltered, the Jedi often filled the gap. This pattern intensified during the years leading to the Clone Wars. Separatist movements spread across thousands of systems. Count Dooku emerged as the political face of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Economic tensions increased, regional conflicts multiplied. Throughout the crisis, the Jedi Council remained deeply involved in strategic discussions occurring near the heart of Republic power. The Council did not seek political control, but its proximity to government ensured that political concerns increasingly shaped its attention. There is a striking visual contrast between the temple and the Senate building nearby. The Senate housed elected representatives, ambitious politicians, lobbyists, and competing interests. The temple housed monks trained to release attachment and pursue harmony through the Force. Yet year after year, both institutions looked out over the same city and responded to the same emergencies. Boundaries that once seemed obvious became less distinct. The Jedi still spoke the language of spiritual service, but many citizens increasingly viewed them as agents of the Republic itself. Why did so many young, Force-sensitive children spend their entire childhood within these walls? To understand that question, you have to leave the council chamber and descend into another part of temple life entirely. Long before Padawans accompanied masters on missions, they began as younglings. Across the galaxy, Jedi recruiters identified Force-sensitive children during infancy. Families consented to allow those children to join the Order. They then traveled to Coruscant, where many would spend years growing up inside the temple. For them, the building was not merely headquarters, it was home. The daily rhythm of youngling life combined education, discipline, and community. Students learned galactic history, languages, ethics, and the principles of the Force. Physical training occupied a significant portion of their schedule. Meditation taught focus and emotional control. Instructors guided them through lessons intended to prepare them for eventual apprenticeship. Unlike ordinary schools, however, the temple sought to shape every aspect of development. The Jedi believed that training begun early provided the best protection against fear, anger, and attachment. The Clone Wars gives us some of the clearest glimpses into this process. Younglings trained together in clan groups under experienced instructors. They practiced with training sabers. They studied ancient traditions. They learned responsibility long before receiving real lightsabers. Although viewers often focus on famous heroes such as Anakin Skywalker or Obi-Wan Kenobi, thousands of less famous students pass through the same halls. Their lives unfolded largely beyond the spotlight of major galactic events. One of the most important milestones was the gathering on Elam. Guided by Jedi teachers, younglings traveled to the icy world where kyber crystals naturally formed within sacred caves. There, each student sought the crystal that resonated personally through the Force. The experience was not presented as a test of strength. It was a test of connection. After locating their crystal, the younglings eventually constructed their first lightsabers. The ritual represented a transition from simple instruction toward deeper responsibility. Imagine returning from Ilum and entering the temple again. The familiar corridors would feel different. The halls that once belonged entirely to teachers and masters now seemed connected to your own future. Every Jedi you passed had undergone similar experiences. Every lightsaber carried a story, beginning somewhere within those icy caves. The temple reinforced continuity across generations. Students inherited traditions from predecessors they would never meet. The Order survived because each generation trained the next. Yet another mystery hides beneath that continuity. The Jedi taught discipline, compassion, and service. They produced heroes who defended worlds across the galaxy. At the same time, the temple separated children from ordinary family life at an extremely young age. Critics inside and outside Star Wars have debated this aspect of the Order for years. Canon does not portray the practice as cruel, but it undeniably shaped how Jedi viewed attachment and identity. The temple offered belonging. It also demanded sacrifice. Ahsoka Tano's later reflections illuminate this tension more clearly than many earlier stories. After leaving the Order near the end of the Clone Wars, she carried both gratitude and disappointment. She remained influenced by Jedi teachings while recognizing flaws within the institution that raised her. Her experience suggests a deeper truth about the temple itself. It was capable of nurturing wisdom and blind spots at the same time. Great strength and great vulnerability often emerged from the same traditions. As evening settled over Coruscant and lights flickered across thousands of distant towers, younglings continued moving through classrooms, masters continued debating in council chambers, and temple guards continued their silent patrols. The Order appeared stable. It appeared eternal. Yet beyond the temple walls, events were already unfolding that would transform every lesson taught within those halls. A war was approaching, and when it arrived, the temple would become something it had never been before, a headquarters for generals. How did the Jedi Temple transform from a sanctuary of peace into the command center of a galactic war? The moment arrived in 22 BBY at the Battle of Geonosis. For generations, the Jedi had served primarily as negotiators, investigators, explorers, and guardians. Then, almost overnight, they became military leaders. The discovery of the clone army on Kamino, combined with the separatist crisis orchestrated by Darth Sidious, pushed the Republic into open conflict. Hundreds of Jedi deployed to Geonosis in an attempt to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Padme Amidala. What followed was the first major battle of the Clone Wars, and by its conclusion the galaxy had entered a new era. The consequences for the temple were immediate. Corridors that once echoed mainly with study and meditation became filled with military briefings, strategic reports, and battlefield updates. Jedi masters who had spent decades resolving disputes through diplomacy now coordinated campaigns involving fleets, armored vehicles, and millions of clone troopers. Star maps displayed active war zones. Reports arrived from worlds such as Christophsis, Ryloth, Umbra, Felucia, and Kashyyyk. Every day brought fresh emergencies. The temple remained outwardly unchanged, but its purpose was shifting. One of the most striking images in the Clone Wars is how naturally the transition seems to occur. Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, Luminara Unduli, and countless others move between the temple and the front lines as if war has become routine. Republic gunships depart for battle. Venator-class Star Destroyers carry Jedi generals across the galaxy. Clone officers await instructions. Military strategy becomes woven into everyday life. The transformation happens so gradually that many Jedi scarcely pause to question it. Yet some voices did question it. Why were monks suddenly leading armies? The question troubled several members of the Order throughout the war. Jedi philosophy emphasized defense, restraint, and harmony with the Force. Military command required entirely different skills. Generals must make decisions that result in casualties. They must evaluate strategic objectives. They must accept that some battles cannot be won without sacrifice. The Republic needed leaders capable of coordinating the Grand Army. The Jedi possessed discipline, intelligence, and authority. But possessing those qualities did not automatically mean they were meant to become generals. No figure embodies this tension more clearly than Anakin Skywalker. During the Clone Wars, he became one of the Republic's most successful commanders. His campaigns repeatedly secured victories against separatist forces. Clone troopers admired him, officers trusted him. His tactical creativity often produced results where conventional methods failed. Yet the war also intensified traits that would later contribute to his fall. Aggression became increasingly useful. Impatience sometimes produced success. Emotional attachment, normally discouraged by Jedi teachings, strengthened his loyalty toward the soldiers under his command. The temple witnessed this transformation in real time. Anakin entered its halls as a gifted but unconventional student. He returned repeatedly from battle, carrying experiences few Jedi of earlier generations could have imagined. Every campaign added new burdens. Every loss deepened his frustration. The Council saw portions of this struggle, but never fully understood its depth. Meanwhile, Chancellor Palpatine quietly positioned himself as the mentor who always listened. The war affected more than Anakin. It altered the culture of the temple itself. Before Geonosis, younglings looked up to Jedi masters renowned for wisdom and scholarship. During the Clone Wars, battlefield heroes increasingly occupied the spotlight. Stories spread about daring victories. Reports celebrated successful campaigns. Clone troopers spoke of legendary commanders. None of this erased traditional Jedi values, but it subtly changed the atmosphere. Military achievement became more visible than contemplation. Heroism became associated with combat. The Order remained committed to peace while spending most of its time fighting a war. The irony is difficult to overlook. The Jedi existed because the Republic needed guardians, yet the war placed them exactly where Darth Sidious wanted them. Every battle stretched their resources. Every casualty weakened them. Every controversial decision damaged public trust. The Sith Lord did not need to defeat the Jedi in open combat. He needed them to become participants in a conflict designed from the beginning to exhaust them. The temple served as the operational heart of the war effort, never realizing that the war itself was part of a larger trap. Why couldn't the Jedi see that the Republic was changing around them? Part of the answer lies with Palpatine's extraordinary manipulation. Throughout the Clone Wars, the Chancellor accumulated emergency powers granted by the Senate. Each new crisis justified additional authority. Many senators accepted these measures because the separatist threat appeared genuine. Citizens wanted security. Systems demanded stability. Palpatine consistently presented himself as the calm leader guiding the Republic through dangerous times. Meanwhile, the Jedi increasingly depended upon the political framework he controlled. The temple stood only a short distance from the Senate, and symbolically the gap between them seemed to shrink every year. Council members attended meetings concerning military strategy. Intelligence flowed constantly between Republic agencies and Jedi leadership. When political crises emerged, the Jedi often found themselves drawn into them. The distinction between serving the Republic and serving its Chancellor became more difficult to define. Palpatine exploited that ambiguity masterfully. Even Yoda sensed that something fundamental was wrong. Throughout the Clone Wars, he repeatedly reflects upon the growing darkness surrounding events. His visions become troubling. His meditations reveal uncertainty. In the 6th season, his journey into the deeper mysteries of the Force exposes just how thoroughly the Sith have clouded the Jedi's perception. The dark side is no longer a distant threat. It permeates the era itself. Yet knowing that danger exists is not the same as identifying its source. The most unsettling aspect of the temple during this period is how normal everything appears on the surface. Younglings continue training. Archives remain active. Council meetings proceed according to tradition. Temple guards patrol the halls. Visitors arrive and depart. Life continues. Beneath that appearance of stability, however, the foundations are beginning to crack. The Jedi believe they are preserving the Republic. In reality, the Republic they are fighting to save is already becoming something else. Ahsoka Tano's departure from the Order offers a revealing glimpse into this fracture. After being falsely accused and expelled before eventually being cleared, she refuses the Council's invitation to return. Her decision shocks many Jedi, particularly Anakin. Yet from her perspective, the institution has failed a crucial test. Procedures mattered more than trust. Reputation mattered more than compassion. The moment does not destroy the Order, but it exposes vulnerabilities that have been growing for years. As the war entered its final stages, the temple remained illuminated against the skyline of Coruscant. Its towers still projected confidence. Its archives still preserved ancient wisdom. Its council still directed Jedi operations across the galaxy. But somewhere beyond those walls, Darth Sidious was preparing the final phase of his plan. The battle for the Republic was approaching its end. The battle for the Temple was about to begin. How could the greatest concentration of Jedi in the galaxy be destroyed in a single night? The answer begins with a betrayal so complete that even now it feels almost impossible. By 19 BBY, the Clone Wars had consumed the Republic for 3 exhausting years. Jedi were scattered across hundreds of battlefronts. Generals led campaigns on worlds separated by vast distances. Entire sectors depended upon clone armies for protection. The Temple still stood on Coruscant, but many of its most experienced defenders were far away. Darth Sidious had spent years arranging precisely this situation. When the final moment arrived, the Jedi Order was isolated, exhausted, and vulnerable in ways few of its members fully understood. The first decisive blow occurred not at the Temple, but in the office of Chancellor Palpatine. After revealing himself to Anakin Skywalker as Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord forced a crisis that shattered everything. Mace Windu, accompanied by Agen Kohler, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto, confronted Palpatine in an attempt to arrest him. The confrontation ended in catastrophe. The 3 accompanying masters were killed. Windu was struck down after Anakin intervened at the critical moment. In a matter of minutes, the Jedi lost some of their most influential leaders. Then came Order 66. Across the galaxy, clone commanders received a simple command from Palpatine. Hidden within the inhibitor chips implanted before their birth, the Order transformed loyal soldiers into executioners. On Megiddo, Ki-Adi-Mundi fell beneath blaster fire from his own troops. On Felucia, Aayla Secura was gunned down by soldiers who had followed her through countless battles. On Kashyyyk, Yoda sensed the disturbance through the Force moments before clones turned against him. On Saleokami, Stas Ali was killed while riding through a battlefield. The purge unfolded simultaneously across hundreds of worlds. Yet the most symbolic target remained Coruscant. Why did Palpatine send Anakin Skywalker to lead the assault personally? From a military perspective, clone troopers could have attacked the temple without him. The 501st Legion was among the most elite formations in the Grand Army of the Republic. Its soldiers had fought under Anakin throughout the Clone Wars and possessed extensive combat experience. They were disciplined, heavily armed, and fiercely effective, yet Sidious understood that this operation was not merely military. It was ritualistic. The destruction of the Jedi Order required more than soldiers. It required the fall of the Chosen One. The image remains one of the most haunting in Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker, newly christened Darth Vader, marches toward the temple steps beneath the night sky of Coruscant. Clone troopers advance alongside him. The building that had served as his home since childhood stands before him, illuminated against the darkness. Inside are teachers, friends, allies, and memories spanning more than a decade. Every corridor is familiar. Every chamber contains pieces of his past, and yet he enters as a conqueror. The assault itself was brutal. Canon sources including Revenge of the Sith, The Clone Wars, Tales of the Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and various comics reveal fragments of what occurred inside. Temple guards attempted resistance. Knights and masters fought desperately. Some defenders organized evacuation efforts. Others tried to protect younglings. The fighting spread through halls once dedicated to learning and meditation. Blaster fire illuminated archive chambers. Lightsabers flashed in corridors where students had trained only days before. The temple became a battlefield. One reason the attack succeeded was simple mathematics. The Order had spent years dispersing its most capable members across the war effort. Obi-Wan Kenobi was on Utapau confronting General Grievous. Yoda was on Kashyyyk assisting Wookiee forces. Plo Koon flew above Cato Neimoidia. Countless others were stationed across the galaxy. The temple contained many Jedi, but not the full strength of the Order. Sidious waited until key figures were absent before striking. The attack also benefited from surprise. Clone troopers had served beside Jedi for years. They shared battlefields, hardships, victories, and losses. Trust had become instinctive. When the betrayal began, many Jedi struggled to comprehend what was happening. Even those who survived the initial moments often found themselves overwhelmed by numbers. The clones possessed military hardware, coordination, and a strategic advantage created through years of planning. Why does the fall of the temple feel so much larger than the destruction of a building? Because what died there was not merely architecture. The temple represented continuity stretching back thousands of years. Generations of masters had taught within its halls. Ancient records filled its archives. Younglings began their journeys there. The council guided the Order from its towers. To attack the temple was to attack the memory of the Jedi themselves. Palpatine understood symbolism. He knew that destroying the temple publicly would demonstrate that a new age had begun. Among the most painful moments in Star Wars is the encounter between Anakin and the younglings who seek his help. The scene is brief, yet its emotional weight echoes through every later story. It illustrates how completely Vader has surrendered himself to Sidious's will. The temple that once nurtured him becomes the place where he abandons the values it taught. The tragedy is intensified because viewers know who Anakin used to be. The same young man who risked everything to save friends now participates in the destruction of his own order. As dawn approached over Coruscant, the temple was effectively lost. Fires burned within sections of the complex, survivors scattered. Clone forces secured key locations. The building still stood physically, but the institution that had inhabited it for millennia had been shattered. Across the galaxy, surviving Jedi sensed catastrophe through the Force. Many did not yet know the details. They only knew that something vast had ended. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda eventually returned to Coruscant after surviving Order 66. Their arrival produced one of the most somber sequences in the saga. Entering the damaged temple, they moved through silent corridors filled with evidence of the massacre. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Familiar rooms felt alien. The atmosphere carried a sense of absence almost impossible to describe. The temple had once been alive with thousands of voices. Now it echoed. There they discovered another critical detail. A signal transmitted from the temple was summoning surviving Jedi back to Coruscant. To an unsuspecting survivor, the message appeared legitimate. In reality, it functioned as a trap. Jedi responding to the signal would arrive directly within reach of Imperial forces. Obi-Wan and Yoda altered the beacon, warning survivors to stay away. The act saved lives. It also acknowledged a painful truth. The temple could no longer serve as a refuge. As they departed, the rain still fell beyond the towering windows. Airspeeders continued moving through the endless city. The Senate still functioned. Citizens still filled the streets below. Coruscant appeared almost unchanged. Yet at the heart of the capital, the ancient home of the Jedi had fallen, and Darth Sidious was preparing his next move. He was not going to destroy the temple. He was going to keep it. Why did Palpatine transform the Jedi Temple into his own palace instead of simply tearing it down? For a man obsessed with symbols, destruction alone was never enough. The temple occupied one of the most important locations on Coruscant. For thousands of years, it had stood as the visible heart of the Jedi Order. Citizens looked toward its 5 towers and thought of guardianship, wisdom, and stability. If Palpatine demolished it, the building would become a martyr. Ruins invite memory. Ruins encourage reflection. By preserving the structure and claiming it for himself, he achieved something far more powerful. He transformed a symbol of the Jedi into a symbol of Imperial victory. Shortly after declaring the formation of the Galactic Empire in 19 BBY, Palpatine began reshaping the temple into the Imperial Palace. The change was both practical and psychological. Government authority now occupied the very place where Jedi authority had once resided. Imperial banners replaced Jedi insignia. Security forces patrolled halls once walked by temple guards. Administrative functions expanded into spaces previously dedicated to meditation and learning. The building remained recognizable from the outside, yet its identity had been fundamentally altered. The symbolism would have been impossible to miss for older citizens. Many had grown up seeing Jedi arrive and depart from those towers. They remembered the temple before the Clone Wars. They remembered its role within the Republic. Now they watched stormtroopers guarding its entrances. They watched Imperial officials move through corridors where younglings had once trained. The message was unmistakable. The old era was over. The Empire had inherited not only the Republic's government, but also the physical heart of its former protectors. There is another layer to the decision that makes it even more fascinating. Why would a Sith Lord choose to live above an ancient Sith shrine that the Jedi had spent centuries suppressing? The answer brings us back to the mystery from the beginning of our journey. The dark side nexus beneath the temple never disappeared. According to canon references in works such as Tarkin and later comics, the ancient shrine remained buried beneath the structure throughout the Republic era. The Jedi built over it. Palpatine inherited it. For a Sith, the location offered extraordinary symbolic value. The greatest victory imaginable was not merely defeating the Jedi. It was ruling from the very place where they had tried to contain darkness. Some fans have suggested that Palpatine appreciated the irony more than any strategic advantage. Others believe the shrine itself contributed to his interest in the location. Canon leaves room for interpretation. What is clear is that the Emperor maintained a deep fascination with ancient Sith knowledge throughout his life, from Exegol to hidden observatories in the unknown regions. Palpatine consistently sought connections to the darkest corners of Force history. Living above a buried Sith shrine fit that pattern perfectly. The temple therefore underwent one of the most dramatic transformations in Star Wars history. A structure designed to oppose the dark side became the residence of the most powerful Sith Lord in generations. The transition feels almost mythological. It resembles a fortress captured during an ancient war, except the war had been fought not only with armies, but with ideas. The Empire did not merely defeat the Jedi physically, it occupied their place in the galaxy. Yet for all his triumph, Palpatine could not erase everything. Why do memories of the temple continue to haunt so many survivors long after its fall? For Obi-Wan Kenobi, the temple represented much of his life. He arrived there as a child. He trained beneath its teachers. He became a Padawan, a knight, and eventually a master within its walls. The destruction of the temple was not simply a political catastrophe. It was deeply personal. Years later, while living in exile on Tatooine, he carried memories of that loss alongside memories of Anakin's fall and the Republic's collapse. The temple became part of a vanished world that existed now only in recollection. Yoda experienced something similar, though on an even larger scale. By the end of the Republic, he had spent centuries within the Order. Entire generations of Jedi had passed through the temple under his guidance. He witnessed its greatest successes and its final failure. When he departed Coruscant after confronting Sidious, he was not merely abandoning a headquarters. He was leaving behind the center of a civilization that had defined most of his existence. Ahsoka Tano occupies a particularly interesting position in this story. She left the Order before Order 66 and therefore escaped the temple's destruction. Yet her connection to it never vanished. Throughout later stories, including Rebels and Ahsoka, traces of Jedi philosophy remain visible in her actions, despite her refusal to identify herself as a Jedi. The temple shaped her even after she walked away from it. In that sense, the building's influence survived beyond its institutional collapse. This reveals something important about the temple. Physical structures matter, but their deepest impact often comes from the people who pass through them. The archives could burn, the council chamber could be repurposed, the towers could fly imperial banners, None of that automatically erased the lessons carried by surviving Jedi. Knowledge scattered across the galaxy through individuals who remembered what they had learned. The Empire conquered the building. Conquering memory proved more difficult. Why did the Emperor remain so obsessed with controlling every remnant of Jedi history? The answer may be simpler than it first appears. Palpatine understood the power of stories. He recognized that ideas can survive military defeat. Throughout the Imperial era, Jedi teachings were suppressed. Historical records were altered. Survivors were hunted by inquisitors and Imperial forces. Yet these efforts reveal something curious. Truly defeated enemies do not require decades of attention. Palpatine continued targeting Jedi remnants because he knew the legacy remained dangerous. The temple itself reflected this anxiety. Although transformed into an imperial palace, it still carried echoes of what had existed before. Beneath the new banners stood the same ancient foundations. Beneath those foundations lay the same dark side shrine. The layers of history remained intact even as their meanings shifted. Coruscant's endless city had always buried the past beneath newer structures. The temple became another example of that pattern, except now the buried past refused to stay silent. And somewhere within those former halls, beyond restricted sections and forgotten chambers, traces of the old order still lingered. Hidden artifacts remained undiscovered. Ancient records escaped destruction. Survivors carried fragments of memory into exile. The temple had fallen, but not every secret it contained had vanished with it. In the years ahead, those secrets would continue whispering through the galaxy long after the Empire believed the Jedi were gone forever. Did the Jedi Temple truly die in 19 BBY, or did parts of it survive in ways the Empire never understood? The obvious answer is that the temple fell during Order 66. Its defenders were overwhelmed, its leadership shattered, its purpose was erased and replaced by Imperial rule. Yet Star Wars repeatedly returns to a different idea. Institutions can die while their influence survives. The temple was more than stone, towers, archives, and chambers. It was a network of teachings, relationships, memories, and traditions spread across thousands of individuals. When the Empire captured the building, it captured a location. The harder task was extinguishing everything that location had created. One of the clearest examples appears in the survivors themselves. Obi-Wan Kenobi carried temple teachings into exile on Tatooine. Yoda preserved ancient Jedi wisdom on Dagobah. Ahsoka Tano continued living according to principles learned during her years as a Padawan. Later, figures such as Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger inherited fragments of Jedi knowledge despite growing up after the fall. None of them possessed the full resources of the old order. None could recreate the temple exactly as it had been, yet each carried part of its legacy forward. This pattern appears throughout Star Wars canon. The Empire repeatedly assumes that eliminating central institutions will eliminate the ideas associated with them. It destroys Alderaan in 0 BBY, hoping to crush resistance. Instead, the Rebel Alliance grows stronger. It hunts surviving Jedi relentlessly, yet new, Force-sensitive heroes continue emerging. Palpatine understands power better than almost anyone, but even he occasionally underestimates how difficult it is to erase belief. The temple's physical destruction became one chapter in a much longer story. There is also the matter of what remained hidden. What secrets might still have existed inside the former temple long after the Empire claimed it? Canon leaves intriguing gaps. We know the temple contained restricted vaults, ancient artifacts, and chambers inaccessible to most Jedi. We know the archives were vast. We know countless generations contributed records and relics. The Empire certainly seized enormous quantities of material after Order 66, but complete control is another matter. Coruscant itself is famous for concealment. Entire districts disappear beneath newer construction. Forgotten levels stretch deep below the modern city. Hidden spaces can survive for centuries without attracting attention. Stories across the franchise repeatedly demonstrate that important artifacts often outlast the institutions meant to protect them. Jedi holocrons survive. Sith relics resurface. Ancient temples are rediscovered long after being abandoned. Against that backdrop, it becomes easy to imagine forgotten corners of the temple enduring beneath Imperial occupation. This is not established canon fact. It is one of those spaces where lore invites speculation. If the Jedi themselves could overlook a buried Sith shrine for generations, what other secrets might have remained concealed within the structure? The possibility becomes even more interesting when viewed through the lens of Coruscant's history. The planet is often described as a city covering an entire world, but that phrase barely captures its scale. Layers upon layers of construction accumulated over thousands of years. Entire civilizations effectively vanished beneath newer developments. By the time of the Empire, many regions of Coruscant had become archaeological mysteries hidden beneath active urban environments. The temple stood atop one such accumulation of history. Its foundations rested upon ages of forgotten events. Why does the ancient Sith shrine beneath the temple remain one of the most unsettling mysteries in canon? Because it raises questions that have never received definitive answers. The Jedi built directly above it. Palpatine later ruled from the same structure. Throughout the final decades of the Republic, the Jedi struggled with clouded vision and growing uncertainty. Canon never explicitly connects all these elements, yet their proximity invites interpretation. The shrine sits beneath the temple like a shadow beneath a flame, always present, never fully explained. Some fans argue that the shrine contributed directly to the Jedi Order's blindness. Others believe Darth Sidious alone was responsible. There is evidence supporting the second explanation. Sidious was extraordinarily powerful, and the suffering generated by the Clone Wars would have amplified the dark side across the galaxy. Yet the shrine remains difficult to ignore. The fact that Lucasfilm chose to establish its existence at all suggests that the location matters. Whether its influence was symbolic, spiritual, or practical remains an open question. Interestingly, this is one area where older legend stories explored ideas the canon has not fully developed. In the non-canon expanded universe, Coruscant possessed a far more detailed ancient history involving Sith activity and hidden locations. Those stories are no longer official continuity. They remain fascinating, but they cannot be treated as explanations for current canon mysteries. Instead, they highlight how much remains unknown. Canon acknowledges the shrine. Beyond that, much of the story is left deliberately unresolved. There is something fitting about that uncertainty. The Jedi spent centuries seeking clarity through the Force, yet some mysteries remained beyond their grasp. The temple reflected that tension. It housed archives dedicated to knowledge while standing above a secret that was never entirely understood. It trained some of the wisest beings in the galaxy while producing individuals capable of tragic mistakes. It represented light while concealing darkness beneath its foundations. The contradictions are not flaws in the story. They are part of what makes the temple so compelling. What, then, was the hidden truth about the Jedi Temple? Not that it contained secret rooms, not that it guarded dangerous artifacts, not even that it stood above an ancient Sith shrine. Those facts are fascinating, but they are not the deepest answer. The hidden truth is that the temple embodied the central paradox of the Jedi Order itself. It was a place built to preserve balance, yet it could not fully escape imbalance. It was dedicated to wisdom, yet wisdom did not grant immunity from error. It stood as a monument to the light side while existing in constant proximity to darkness. By the time Luke Skywalker helped restore hope to the galaxy, the old temple was already part of history. New generations inherited lessons drawn from its rise and fall. Some lessons concerned courage, others concerned humility. Still, others concerned the danger of becoming too closely tied to political power. The temple's story became larger than the building itself. It became a warning and an inspiration at the same time. And so we return to the image with which this journey began. Rain drifts down the towering windows. The lights of Coruscant shimmer beyond the glass. The corridors are quiet now. The voices of masters, Padawans, and younglings have faded into memory. Yet somewhere beneath those ancient foundations, far below the towers that once touched the clouds, the buried darkness remains where it has always been, waiting silently beneath the place where the guardians of the light once called home. If the Jedi Temple was ultimately a failure, why does its story continue to matter so much? At first glance, the verdict appears obvious. The Jedi Order lost the Clone Wars without realizing it. The Republic collapsed. Darth Sidious achieved his objective. Order 66 shattered an institution that had endured for millennia. The temple itself fell into Imperial hands. Measured purely by immediate outcomes, the final chapter seems tragic beyond dispute. Yet Star Wars has always treated history differently. Success and failure rarely remain fixed. The consequences of an event continue unfolding long after the event itself ends. Consider the position of the galaxy only a few decades after the temple's fall. In 19 BBY, Palpatine appeared unstoppable. By 0 BBY, however, the Rebel Alliance was growing. By 4 ABY, the Emperor was dead above Endor. Darth Vader had returned to the light in his final moments. The empire that conquered the temple proved far less permanent than the institution it replaced. The Jedi lost a war, but the ideas they represented survived their defeat. In the long view of history, that distinction matters enormously. Luke Skywalker is perhaps the clearest example. He never trained within the temple. He never studied under the council. He never walked the archive halls as a youngling. Yet nearly everything that made his journey possible originated there. Obi-Wan carried temple teachings to Tatooine. Yoda preserved them on Dagobah. Through those surviving teachers, fragments of the old order reached Luke. The chain remained unbroken Damaged, scattered, and incomplete, certainly. Broken, no. Why does Luke's story reveal something the Jedi themselves struggle to understand? Because Luke inherited their wisdom without inheriting every assumption. The Jedi of the late Republic often viewed attachment with deep suspicion. Their experiences had taught them to fear its dangers. Anakin Skywalker's fall seemed to validate those concerns. Yet Luke ultimately succeeds not by abandoning compassion for his father, but by embracing it. In Return of the Jedi, he refuses Palpatine's invitation to kill Vader. He refuses hatred. He refuses despair. The decision becomes the turning point of galactic history. This does not mean the old Jedi were entirely wrong. Their warnings about fear, anger, and possessiveness remain central truths within Star Wars. What Luke demonstrates is something subtler. Traditions survive best when they continue learning. The temple preserved immense knowledge, but knowledge can become rigid if it stops questioning itself. Luke's generation inherited the legacy of the Jedi while also revealing where adaptation might be necessary. In that sense, the fall of the temple became part of the education of future Jedi. There is a remarkable irony hidden within the building's history. For thousands of years, the temple stood above an ancient Sith shrine. The Jedi believed they could contain darkness by building over it. Eventually, the Sith seized the temple itself, yet neither side achieved permanent victory. The Jedi could not eliminate darkness forever. The Sith could not eliminate light forever. Again and again, the galaxy returned to balance through struggle, sacrifice, and renewal. Why do so many Star Wars stories keep returning to ancient temples, forgotten archives, and lost teachings? Because physical places become containers for memory. The temple on Coruscant was never important merely because of its architecture. It mattered because generations invested meaning into it. Every lesson taught there added another layer. Every Padawan trained there contributed to its identity. Every master who sat in the council chamber became part of its story. Buildings endure because people remember what happened inside them. Once memory disappears, even the grandest structures become empty shells. That truth appears repeatedly throughout canon. The Jedi Temple on Lothal survives long after its builders are gone. Ancient ruins on Ahch-To preserve echoes of earlier generations. Sith strongholds continue influencing events centuries after their creators vanish. The Force itself seems to remember. Certain locations acquire significance because history leaves impressions behind. The temple on Coruscant became one of the most powerful examples in the galaxy. And perhaps that brings us to the deepest mystery of all. What was the hidden truth about the Jedi Temple on Coruscant? Not that it concealed secret vaults. Not that it stood above a Sith shrine. Not that Palpatine transformed it into an imperial palace. Those are pieces of the story, but they are not the center of it. The hidden truth is that the temple reflected the strengths and weaknesses of the Jedi Order with perfect honesty. Its soaring towers represented aspiration. Its archives represented knowledge. Its training halls represented discipline. Beneath all of them lay reminders that darkness could never be ignored, only confronted. For thousands of years, Jedi walked those corridors believing they were guardians of peace and justice. Most genuinely were. They protected worlds, ended conflicts, and devoted themselves to service. Yet the temple also witnessed complacency, political entanglement, and blind spots that accumulated slowly across generations. The building preserved both triumph and error. It became a mirror in stone, reflecting everything the Order achieved and everything it failed to see. And so as our journey comes to an end, the rain is still falling beyond the windows. Coruscant stretches endlessly into the distance, a sea of lights disappearing into the night. The voices that once filled the temple have long since faded. The council chamber is silent. The archives rest in darkness. Yet if you stand in that corridor and listen carefully, you can almost imagine distant footsteps echoing through the halls, reminders of the countless Jedi who once called this place home. Above them rose the towers of the temple. Beneath them slept an ancient shadow. And between those two realities, suspended for thousands of years, lived one of the greatest mysteries in all of Star Wars. When you look back across the long history of the Jedi Temple, what stays with you is not its fall, it is its contradiction. The temple stood above darkness while dedicating itself to the light. It housed immense wisdom while remaining vulnerable to error. It trained heroes capable of extraordinary compassion, yet it sometimes struggled to understand the fears and attachments that made those heroes human. That contradiction is not unique to the Jedi. It is one of the central truths of Star Wars itself. Every generation inherits both strengths and weaknesses from those who came before, and every generation must decide what to preserve, what to question, and what to leave behind. The Force, as these stories repeatedly remind you, is not a prize that can be possessed. The Sith seek control and eventually become prisoners of their own hunger. The Jedi seek harmony and sometimes mistake stability for balance. Palpatine spent decades gathering power, manipulating governments, armies, and entire civilizations until he seemed invincible. Yet his triumph contained the seeds of its own collapse because domination cannot create lasting loyalty. The Jedi Temple fell because the Order failed to see certain dangers clearly, but the Empire ultimately fell because it believed fear alone could shape the future. Across both stories runs the same lesson. Power can influence destiny, but it cannot own it. There is also something quietly moving about the fact that the temple's greatest legacy was never its architecture, not the 5 towers, not the council chamber, not the vast archives. Buildings matter, but they are only vessels. What endured were the choices carried by individuals. Obi-Wan carrying hope across decades of exile. Yoda preserving wisdom on a forgotten swamp world. Ahsoka refusing to surrender her conscience, even after losing faith in the institution that raised her. Luke Skywalker choosing mercy when hatred would have been easier. The temple survived through them because its highest ideals became actions rather than monuments. Perhaps that is why the buried Sith shrine matters so much symbolically. The Jedi spent centuries living above it, never fully escaping the reality beneath their feet. Darkness was not somewhere else. It was not confined to distant worlds or ancient enemies. It existed alongside them, just as fear, pride, anger, and doubt exist alongside courage, discipline, compassion, and hope within every living being. The temple story suggests that balance is not achieved by pretending darkness does not exist. Balance comes from recognizing it, understanding it, and refusing to let it determine who you become. That lesson echoes from the earliest days of the Republic all the way to the redemption of Anakin Skywalker and beyond. And so, The hidden truth about the Jedi Temple is ultimately the hidden truth about the Star Wars saga. Victory and failure are rarely final. Light and darkness are rarely separated by clear walls. The most important battles are often not fought with lightsabers or fleets, but within choices made by individuals standing at moments of uncertainty. The temple rose, flourished, fell, and was transformed, yet the ideals it represented continued moving through history in unexpected ways. What seemed lost returned. What seemed permanent vanished. The Force continued flowing through it all. Now the city is quiet again. Rain slides down the towering windows in long silver lines. Beyond the glass, Coruscant glows beneath the night, endless rivers of light stretching toward the horizon. The corridors are empty, the voice is gone, the age of the Jedi long passed into memory. Yet somewhere in the silence, beneath the towers and beneath the ancient stone, you can almost hear a distant echo of footsteps, fading slowly into the storm as the lights of the galaxy drift quietly by.